JJK for me arrived at a time when I think I needed it the most. There wasn't really any new gen anime coming out at the time that really piqued my interest. You know, I tried Demon Slayer, really couldn't get into it. Chainsaw Man seemed pretty cool, but once I learned about Denji's whole thing, I kind of like veered away from it. I will give it a try one of these days just to, you know, see what I'm missing, because I've heard it's very good. But I'm pretty sure at the time the only anime that I was watching consistently was One Piece, funnily enough, and I used to be an avid One Piece hater, but I love it now, as you can tell from this channel. But a running theme that I saw as I watched and eventually began to read the JJK manga was that Yuji's story was essentially one of suffering. I mean, think about it. His entire purpose in being born was to be a vessel for destruction, a purpose that was created for him by his own mother, which is crazy. And the only family member we see that Yuji, family member in terms of parentage, you know, the closest thing he had to like a parent was his grandfather. That was the only proper parenting relationship he had, and he was dying at the beginning of the story. He literally died in the first episode, and he died asking Yuji to help people and not die alone. Something we now know, if you don't, he never really gets to achieve. And that is honestly very tragic for his character, if you know his character. But now we're gonna tackle this video in two parts. His time spent as Sukuna's vessel and his time spent post-vessel. And we will discuss some things in the JJK sequel manga, Modulo, because we do have to touch on that a little bit. But as usual, thank you guys so much for the support. So let's get into it. So as we previously said, JJK literally starts out with Yuji's grandfather dying, who at this point is the only familial connection, let alone fatherly connection, that he has in his life. Yuji literally starts out the story at his lowest point. He is grieving his grandfather after his cremation. He's in that crematory with his ashes. And the next biggest thing to happen in Yuji's life after this is literally becoming the vessel of the JJK equivalent to the devil. Right? And this honestly should have been our first hint as to how his life is going to go, because for the most part, JJK season 1, while it does have its dark and serious moments, you always had this sense that everything would kind of work out in some way. I mean, in the very same episode, we're introduced to Gojo Satoru, of course. Sorry, I had to throw one of those in there, you know, just for the one time. But while we were told just how dangerous Sukuna was, there was always this sense that if things got bad enough, you know, Gojo would be there to solve it. And I mean, why wouldn't you believe him? We saw Megumi struggle to fight a one-finger Sukuna to the point he was about to summon Maharaga, that goddamn bum. Oh my god, this fucking potential, man. I'm sorry. That Megumi, every time we're gonna make a video on that. But the point being, Gojo came in and absolutely manhandled Sukuna and even stayed Yuji's execution just off his raw power alone, because, you know, the higher ups in Jujutsu Society were terrified of him. But the execution was something that Yuji himself had resigned himself to, right? And this is hitting more at the suffering that Yuji was going through, because imagine going from your father figure dying to literally becoming the Antichrist in the same day and then being put up for execution. That's just, it's a lot to take in a very, what at max was a week. Let's be honest here, it was a week at max. But that is all I want to discuss from season 1, because I have said previously that while season 1 has its dark moments, it's pretty, you feel like everything's gonna work out. So I want to really move on to season 2, or the Shibuya incident, as it is so famously called, where Gege, I believe, really starts pushing Yuji's suffering to the forefront and kind of getting to how dark this story really will be, right? So the first big incident or event of the Shibuya incident is that Gojo, Yuji's teacher at this point, has been sealed within the prison realm, right? And Gojo is essentially his safety net, if we're being honest. Like, Yuji depends that if he were to lose control of Sukuna, he knows that Gojo at the very least can come and rail Sukuna back in. But aside from Gojo being sealed, Yuji does persevere anyway, because he's like, okay, we just need to get Gojo back, release him, and we're good. And after this, Yuji is forced to turn into Sukuna, who went and absolutely massacred the entirety of Shibuya, killing hundreds of thousands of people. And then Sukuna switches back to just to allow him to take in all of the destruction, right? Sukuna's literally on the crater of all the lives, all the everything that he's done within his fight between Jogo and Maharaga, and just lets Yuji take it all in. And this is mentally breaking Yuji. And this is then followed up by him seeing his other teacher figure, Nanami, who he had also developed somewhat of a good relationship with, being killed by what I would describe as Yuji's biggest op at this point. And honestly, I would say other than Sukuna, Mahito is Yuji's biggest op. But you know, that's not enough, because this is then followed up by Mahito taking out one of Yuji's best friends, Nobara. And these three things happening back to back nearly drove him to a breaking point. It almost had a psychotic break for him. And honestly, if it wasn't for Todo showing up and going absolutely schizophrenic and helping him to keep going, it's just like, imagine going through all this within the same span of a night. And honestly, it was in the span of like a few hours, right? And I mean, sure, throughout the Shibuya incident, there were some bright spots, if you can call it that, right? Yuji found out that he had a brother, even though he was kind of denying it, but you know, that's a new family connection for him. But this is balanced out by him also having been the one who killed his other brothers, right? Because in season 1, we learn, retroactively of course, that those Death Moon paintings were also Yuji's brothers. And by the end of the Shibuya incident, Todo seems to have lost his curse technique. And by this point, Yuji has resigned himself after the Shibuya incident to be just being a cog in Jujutsu Society for taking out curses, which is what he believes is an atonement for what occurred in Shibuya at the hands of Sukuna. And this is a stark contrast to how we start the series out with Yuji, because he was, you know, he kind of had that main character heroic ideal kind of thing, right? And while Yuji doesn't become evil, he definitely does have a darker and more serious outlook on life, right? And in the very next arc, Yuji finds out about his familial history outside of his grandfather. We learn that Kenjaku himself, themselves, you know, Kenjaku can be man or a woman, was actually Yuji's mom. That's crazy, right? And his entire purpose, like we said, from birth, was just to become a vessel for destruction, a vessel for Sukuna. Imagine that the person who birthed you only had you not to love you, not to watch you grow, but to become a walking calamity. But wait, there is more, because by the end of the Culling Games arc, which was set up by Kenjaku, Yuji's mother, Sukuna swaps bodies with Megumi, right? Yuji tries to stop him, but of course wasn't powerful enough. And Yuji, ever since the beginning of the story, has been plagued by these traumatic events, right? And the craziest part is that Yuji's time spent as Sukuna's vessel, in my opinion, honestly, isn't even when he suffered the most. So let's move on to his time post-vessel. So after Sukuna snatches the body of his 16-year-old boy, not too long after, Gojo is released from the prison realm, and he essentially pulls up on Sukuna and Kenjaku to let them know that he has them on notice. So finally, there's some semblance of light being returned, not to only Jujutsu Society, but also in Yuji's life, because the only person that he felt with confidence could actually save Megumi is back. So we fast forward to the Gojo versus Sukuna fight, which we won't discuss here because it deserves its own video. I have my own opinions on it, and I'm gonna make a video about that. The long-awaited showdown to prove the strongest sorcerer is finally here. And he's dead. He's dead. Yeah, exactly as it felt like everything was gonna be okay. After a series of jumping with a stolen technique and binding vows and whatever else bullshit reasons that Gege wants to pull out of his ass, Gojo Satoru is off-screened in front of his students. It's actually crazy and disrespectful, but whatever. Then in comes the Waffle, the one who was apparently the strongest sorcerer in his own time, right? Believing he has a chance just for Sukuna to revert back to his true form and absolutely obliterate him. Like, just he essentially snapped him out of the air. But this also meant that all the work that Gojo had done to weaken Sukuna was essentially out the window, right? And now Yuji and an assortment of Jujutsu High competitors come in to take on Sukuna, only for Hiruma to seemingly die, and Yuta is seemingly hit with the same attack that took out Gojo. No, not seemingly, he was to seemingly die. Not to mention that Choso, Yuji's actual brother, sacrificed himself to save Yuji right in front of him, right in front of his face. So needless to say that while Yuji is very much locked in on this fight, believe me, he is. Yuji's losing people left, right, and center. And now we all know just how much Yuji's comrades mean to him. So imagine having to see that with the idea that none of this would have happened if he had been executed, right? Yuji had already accepted the fact that he ate Sukuna's finger, but he keeps in the back of his mind throughout the story that if he had just been executed, none of this would have been happening, right? Like all of this would have just been done. Not to mention the fact that the suffering that Megumi was going through with all the infinite voids that Sukuna was transferring to him, right? And now by the end of the fight, the only people who stayed dead were Gojo, RIP to the real strongest sorcerer there ever was, Kashimo's bum ass, I don't really care about that, and Choso. And you know, all things considered, this should be a happy ending because they went up against the King of Curses, the strongest curse of all time, strongest sorcerer of all time, my goddamn goodness. And they only really came out with 3 people dead. Sure was one of their strongest, but you know, Yuta came out, he looked like Kenjaku now. Maki came out pretty unscathed. And yeah, honestly, yeah, all things considered, they made it out pretty well until, you know, we get to JJK Shippuden, because we have to talk about JJK Shippuden. I'm sorry, I had to throw that joke in there. But you know, real quick, all jokes aside, JJK Medulo takes place 68 years into the future, and everyone at this point has grown old, married, and had a seemingly happy life. Except for Itadori Yuji, of course. Now, I genuinely couldn't tell you what Gege has against Yuji. I don't know what. I think Yuji may be the only character that Gege hates more than Gojo. It's actually crazy. But we find out that in the future, Yuji has not aged like at all. And also, did I mention that Sukuna is essentially Yuji's uncle? Well, not essentially. He's literally Yuji's uncle. So yeah, he was getting bullied and traumatized by his uncle for an entire year. So kind of add that to the list. It's crazy. But anyways, back on topic. In Jujutsu Society in the future, Yuji has taken up the role of both Gojo and Sukuna in a way, right? He's now considered the strongest sorcerer in all of Japan. Love that for you, my boy. But also, either has extremely slowed aging or just does not age at all. We haven't confirmed which one yet because the manga hasn't really addressed it, but I'm hoping that they do, because I don't know, Gege doesn't really have the best track record in terms of wrapping up everything by the end of the manga, but we'll see. Anyways, the point being, we are told he essentially watched all his friends he made throughout his life age and die, while he himself remained young. Imagine how gut-wrenching it must have been to be unable to achieve the one thing that his grandfather asked of him. Even outside of that, imagine just watching your best friends slowly wither away and notice that you aren't, and you just end up attending everyone's funeral. Yuji doesn't even get the privilege of aging with his friends, and now he's just seen as a weapon at the disposal of the use of the Japanese government. So much so that he has isolated himself, and we know just how much his friends really meant to him. So my main reason for making this video is because I genuinely don't think it's talked about enough just yet. And I think it could be because the anime isn't there yet, or it could be because of how JJK ending, but Yuji is genuinely one of the most tragic characters in all of anime. I mean, from birth, he was nothing more than a vessel for someone else. He had maybe 10 years of a happy life as a child, then his grandfather died, then for an entire year, it's like he fell off a cliff and just kept falling. Because everything that we discussed in this video, except for the Medulo stuff, happened within the span of 1 year. And then he probably lived another 20 to 30 years happily before realizing what was really going on with his aging. And then it just started up for him again, right? And I genuinely hope that by the end of Medulo, or Modulo, however you pronounce it, I don't know, Yuji gets to at least pass on surrounded by people he loves. And honestly, the only person left is Nobara. But at least, like, get him some peace. Like, let Yuji Itadori rest. He deserves it. There's not a character in modern anime that I think deserves to have just rest more than Yuji. And that's crazy for me to say, because by the beginning of JJK, I didn't think it would get here. Anyways, that's it for this video. You know, I just wanted to bring light to the aspect of this character that, again, nobody really talks about. So if you enjoyed, please consider leaving a sub, a comment, a like, and just let me know what you guys think I can improve on. I love you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.